Finished, and we'll move to question time, and I call Senator Cash.
Question is to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Wong. Minister, considering the shambolic and disastrous impact of the Western Australian Labor government's Aboriginal cultural heritage laws, particularly on farmers, local councils and environmental groups, will the minister now abandon the Albanese Labor government's promise to change cultural heritage laws at a national level?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Order. Senator Watts, both senators on my left and my right. Order. Order. Senator Pratt. I am going to ask for silence while the minister responds. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. The first point I'd make is it appears that the first question on both days from the opposition is about actions of a state government. Yeah. I'm pleased that they're so. I'm pleased that they're so supportive of what this government is doing that they don't appear to be able to ask questions critical of what our policy is. But as the minister well knows, the issues around the Western Australian legislation are matters for the Western Australian government. And I would make the point that I understand that the Shadow Attorney-General, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, is amongst those who wish to conflate those issues in her opposition to the Voice. And anybody who's been to Western Australia or spoken to any Western Australians will know that that is a political tactic because you oppose the Voice. I've been around for I've been in politics for a while, and I think we all understand the scare campaign. Senator Cash is good at those.
Senator Wong, please resume your order. Order. On both my left and my right. Before Senator Wong got to her feet, I asked for silence during her answer. Minister, please continue.
In relation to the second point, I am surprised, given the comments of your own Deputy Leader, Ms Lee, in relation to Indigenous heritage protection, that you would ask me whether or not we should abandon them. The Minister and now Deputy Leader of the Opposition told The Australian in November of 2021 Indigenous heritage protection remains all too complex and it needs to be addressed through a national conversation. The option paper you're asking me about was commissioned by you. The options paper you're running a scare campaign on was commissioned by you. And if you ever wanted an example of why those opposition use every argument they can to oppose a vote—
Senators, once again, twice now I've asked for silence during the answer, and you've completely disregarded my direction. I'm not asking you, it's a direction. Minister, please continue.
The options paper in relation to Indigenous heritage protection was commissioned under you, and I think the scare campaign you are running is really reprehensible.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Watts and Senator Henderson. Senator Cash, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Can you guarantee to the people of Australia that the Albanese government's cultural heritage laws will not mean, as in Western Australia, that anyone on more than 1,100 square metres of land will be required to apply and pay potentially thousands of dollars for a permit before carrying out a range of activities, including the planting of trees, erecting fences or even clearing tracks?
Minister Wong.
Well, the scare campaign. Yep. The scare campaign.
Order.
You know, you're asking me questions about state legislation in an attempt to try and drop up opposition to the Voice. Let's be clear what you are doing. Let's be clear what you are doing. And I've just invited you to remember this. Your Deputy Leader, it's her options paper. Why won't you support Susan Lee?
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Order. We are on the second supplementary of the first question, and this chamber is completely disorderly, on my left and my right. I'm waiting. Senator Cash, you've asked your question, and I expect you then to listen in silence and to stop the interjections across the chamber. Minister Wong, please continue.
This is a bit like electric vehicles will end the weekend, isn't it? And who was that? That was you two? Or was that Mr Morrison?
Order,
that was Mr Morrison.
right. Senator Watt.
Those issues. Am I being called?
Senator
or am
Cash.
I going?
No.
Not at the moment. Those matters that you put to me are state government policy. They are not our government's policy. Our government's policy position is to go through the options
Senator
paper
Wong,
and the conversation that you called for.
Order. Order. Senator O'Sullivan and Senator Hughes. Order across the chamber. Senator Cash, I'm waiting. Senator Hughes, I've called you twice. Senator Ayres, I don't intend to call every senator in this chamber to silence. I've asked for silence. I expect silence. Minister.
What I can say is this. The government is not proposing any Commonwealth takeover of state laws. We will not be adopting or duplicating existing state and territory regimes. And if the senator would like to recall, this is all about ensuring that a tragedy like Juukan Gorge does not happen again, something that both parties of government, I thought,
Minister, the time for
supported.
answering has expired. Second supplementary, Senator Cash.
Thank you, Minister. If you are proceeding with these laws, how can the people of Australia have any confidence that your laws will differ from the shambolic and disastrous Western Australian Labor government's cultural heritage
Senator
laws?
Watts. Order. Order on my right. Order. Order. Minister Wong.
Again, I remind those opposite that the options paper they're running a scare campaign on was issued by their government.
Correct.
That the propositions which have been put to me by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition are about state laws, and I suggest she put them to the state government. And I finally remind the opposition of this, that there was once bipartisan support for updating national laws to better protect First Nations heritage. There were, I think, 2 parliamentary reports chaired by the member for Leichhardt. There was a time when those opposite were not prepared to sacrifice that principle in pursuit of the sort of scare campaign that we have come to expect from Senator Cash.
Senator Walsh.
My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Noting the Treasurer recently stated in an interview with Sky News that, and I quote, "As a government, we have very deliberately made this fight against inflation our #1 priority, and that our biggest focus right now is rolling out this cost of living help for people doing it tough." Can the Minister outline how the Albanese government's economic plan is delivering responsible and targeted cost of living relief to Australians who need it most?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Walsh for her question. We understand that high inflation and high interest rates are putting pressure on the budgets of Australian households. That's why central to our economic plan is our package around cost of living relief. And that support is directed to those who need help the most and timed in terms of how that relief is rolling out. Our measures include the largest investment in bulk billing incentives ever, helping 11.6 million eligible Australians access a GP with no out-of-pocket costs. Reducing the cost of medicines by up to half for at least 6 million people, saving Australians $1.6 billion in out-of-pocket costs over the next 4 years. Increasing the base rate for payments like JobSeeker, Youth Allowance and AusStudy, and delivering the biggest increase in Commonwealth rent assistance by 15% in over 3 decades. We've got up to $3 billion of electricity bill relief through the energy bill relief that's will benefit more than 5 million eligible households and 1 million eligible small businesses. We're supporting housing supply and home ownership, delivering cheaper childcare and paid parental leave. And we've seen the disastrous alternative to our responsible approach from those opposite, voting against energy bill relief for millions of households, opposing cheaper housing through the HAF, opposing cheaper medicines and supporting bigger tax breaks for people who've already got tens of millions of dollars in super.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Henderson, I called you to order and you immediately kept going. That is disrespectful. I've asked and I expect you to come to order when called. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President. We know that those opposite are happy to complain about the cost of living, but when it comes to finding solutions, they've got nothing to contribute and would rather stand in the way. This side of the Senate understands the impact of cost of living pressures are having on Australians, which is why we're doing all we can to make a meaningful difference to households around this country.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Given the recent budget had a focus on ensuring the government's fiscal policy is working in line with monetary policy to tackle inflation and not add to inflationary pressures, can the minister outline what impact the government's responsible and targeted cost of living policies are having on inflation?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the question. The Albanese government's cost of living policies have been carefully calibrated and designed to take pressure off inflation rather than add to it. And the centrepiece of our budget was a $14.6 billion cost of living package. Treasury estimates our policies to ease cost of living pressures are expected to directly reduce inflation by 3/4 of a percentage point in 23-24. And the Reserve Bank Governor, Phil Lowe, has also backed in our cost of living policies to deal with higher energy prices when he told the Senate estimates in May. The budget, largely through the energy price package, which I'll just remind you voted against, is taking pressure off inflation. That's a first-order effect. Price pressures in our economy are still higher than we'd like, but the actions that the government is taking is making a meaningful difference to families around the country and being responsible with our budget at the same time.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Walsh, second supplementary.
Thank you. Recognising that Australians are doing it tough and that inflation is forecast to be higher for longer than we'd like, can the minister outline what the latest inflation data shows about the cost of living pressures facing Australian families and the progress we're making to moderate inflation?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Walsh for the question. Last Wednesday saw the release of the CPI for the June quarter, and over that quarter CPI increased 6% over the year to the June quarter, down from the peak of 7.8% over the year to December quarter last year. Inflation increased by 0.8% over the quarter. This is less than half the quarterly peak when it reached its peak in the March quarter of 2022, which was at 2.1%, which was just before the election. It's pleasing that inflation is moderating, and while we would prefer it to moderate more quickly to ease pressure on household budgets, we are making progress. And our economic plan has three parts: the budget restraint, the finding of savings, the banking of upgrades to revenue, the targeted cost of living relief that's not adding to inflation, and investments to lift the capacity of the economy over the long term.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Brockman.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for the Environment, Senator Wong. On the 30th of May 2023, Minister Plibersek said that the Albanese government was systemically changing our cultural heritage laws in a co-design partnership with the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance. This deeply impacts farming communities across Western Australia. I'd urge you to listen. Minister, why does the so-called co-design partnership apparently not include farmers and indeed any other Australians holding private property rights who will clearly be substantially impacted by any changes to the law?
Before I call the minister, I'm going to remind people on my right to stop the interjections. Minister Wong.
Thank you. I am not sure of the context of the quote that the senator is using, but if it's something similar to what Ms Lee said when minister, she said it needs to be addressed through a national conversation. This is about the government working with Indigenous Australians and recognising their right to determine what is important to them. So said Ms Lee. Now, I would make the point that I have no doubt that Minister Plibersek will, if there are any changes that are proposed, ensure that all stakeholders are consulted, just as I know Minister Watt is very consultative in his portfolio with some of the sectors and industries and communities that you reference. I think it is regrettable that the opposition is using the concerns that people have about some state legislation, which I understand, but people are using it in order to try and fuel some fear about what this government is doing, when we are actually taking a very similar approach to this that was taken by the previous government. I go back to the response I gave, and I think the answer to the second supplementary that Senator Cash gave me. We did have the destruction of Juukan Gorge, and we all, including the company concerned, recognise what a tragedy that was, that destruction of First Nations heritage. And there was an agreement across government and across parliament that we did need to ensure that this didn't happen again. And I regret that the tenor of the questions to me today demonstrate that bipartisanship in some quarters, well, you may snort Senator Cash, but I actually think there are some things which should be bipartisan, and it is disappointing that you don't seem to think so.
Senator Brockman, first supplementary.
Thank you.
Sorry, Senator Brockman, I am going to ask for silence. Senator Cash, you have one of your own people on their feet. Senator Brockman, please continue.
Thank you, President. Minister, and I'll preface this again by saying these laws and a Labor approach to these laws is having a significant impact on regional communities, particularly farming communities. Can you guarantee that the Albanese government's cultural heritage laws will not follow the West Australian Labor model of imposing penalties of up to $1 million for individuals and $10 million for corporation, as well as jail terms, massive penalty in jails terms for even inadvertent breaches?
Thank you, Senator
if
Brockman.
not, why not?
The time for asking the question has expired. Minister Wong.
I said in relation to an answer to Senator Cash, we will not be adopting or duplicating existing state and territory regimes. What we will be doing is modernising Indigenous heritage protection laws in Australia. And I'm grateful for Senator Duniam, who on the 28th of November last year said this: the Juukan Gorge events were so disastrous that they made it very clear that comprehensive work needed to begin as a matter of urgency on modernising Indigenous heritage protection laws in Australia. So, I didn't hear him running the scare campaign then. This is what that is about. This is what that is about. Well, I'm asked over here what's changed. Well, we know what's changed. A bit of political opportunism from those
Senator
opposite,
Cash,
which is extremely disappointing. Senator, I appreciate that you have a particular position on the state legislation, but that is not passed through this parliament. That is passed through the Western Australian Parliament. And what this government does is correct, Senator Duniam, and what we are doing is modernising, as you said.
Senator Duniam, you do not have the call. Senator Duniam, you have one of your own senators on his feet. Senator Brockman, second supplementary.
Thank you. Minister, what modelling have you done or will you commit to doing to assess the cost impact of your proposed cultural heritage law changes on the agricultural sector, on the housing sector and on the mining sector?
Thank you, Senator Brockman. Before I call the minister, I'm waiting for order again. Minister Wong.
I'd be grateful if, I'm not sure which proposed laws you're referring to. What I understand to be happening is what Senator Duniam flagged and Ms Lee flagged, which is a conversation about modernising laws in accordance with the bipartisan recommendation of inquiries that the member for Leichhardt was engaged in. If you are concerned about state laws, and perhaps you might consider whether or not the Western Australian Parliament needs you. But the reality is here we don't pass state legislation. We pass Commonwealth legislation,
Senator
and
Henderson.
we are responsible. We are responsible for the process of bringing forward Commonwealth legislation, as I understand it, and I will check because obviously I'm representing in this book.
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Interjections across the chamber are disorderly. The minister is on her feet answering the question, and I expect there to be silence. Minister Wong, please continue.
As I said, there is no legislation that is before us, nor that has been put out for any consultation. There is a conversation and consultation about modernising these laws in accordance with
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Whish-Wilson.
The question is to the senator representing the Minister for the Environment and Water, Senator Wong. It's been reported that 44% of the world's oceans are currently experiencing measured marine heat waves. We're experiencing record ocean temperatures in the North Atlantic, Mediterranean and Gulf of Mexico, and unprecedented low levels of winter sea ice in Antarctica. Last week, waters off the coast of the US state of Florida hit 38.8 degrees Celsius, the highest in recorded history anywhere, causing widespread immediate coral bleaching. Senator Wong, do acknowledge these ocean warming events are climate change linked to rising global emissions largely caused by the burning of fossil fuels?
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. Senator Wong.
I think that that's a matter of scientific record, that climate change has an effect on the marine domain as it has an effect on the terrestrial domain and so forth. And if I may say, in addition to that, one of the things we know is occurring and a risk that, particularly for Pacific Island regions and Southeast Asia, is the effect that these events, these phenomena, which include warming but also different patterns of warming in different currents, the effect that that phenomena is having on fish stocks. Remembering, of course, one of the things we forget, because we obviously have a large continent and produce a lot of beef and meat, that the primary source of protein for much of the world in our region is fish. And one of the things that we have engaged in detail about with Pacific Island nations and Indonesia and others is how is it that we can look to ensure we secure fish stocks at a time where climate change is, amongst other things, impacting upon the availability and pattern of fish. One of the ways in which we can do that is obviously the regulation of fishing, but more broadly there are environmental measures as well in relation to oceans and the broader issue of how it is we as a country ensure that we play our part in the plotting or tracking along the path from Paris towards net zero by 2050. We are determined to do that, and the report that was released overnight by UNESCO in relation to the reef recognises the work that this government is doing in the face of climate change. I don't think on this side of the parliament you've had the same views that have been expressed on the other side for over a decade, where we have been questioning the science, where we disagree, and we do disagree with your policy propositions. Thank you, Minister. The time for
answering has expired. Senator Whish-Wilson, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Overnight, as you pointed out, Senator, UNESCO released its draft recommendation to not list the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Values in danger, with a progress report now due in February of next year. In its draft decision, UNESCO has effectively put Australia on notice that a World Heritage in Danger listing for the reef is still possible next year. Senator, with the Bureau of Meteorology likely to upgrade its forecast for an El Niño any day now, with the increased likelihood of coral bleaching, do you accept UNESCO's statement overnight that the Great Barrier Reef still remains under serious threat?
The time for answering your question has expired. Minister.
Thank you. And I think the Minister for the Environment, as well as the Special Envoy for the Great Barrier Reef, Senator Green, and the Prime Minister today did stand up and make comments before the media about this issue. And yes, we do recognise that we do recognise the importance of the reef, how critical the reef is to Queensland's environment, economy, and we also understand the importance of acting on climate. Furthermore, we understand the importance of investing in the Great Barrier Reef. Well, we are committed as a government to protecting the reef for the 64,000 jobs which rely on it. We also recognise that UNESCO has seen significant progress made by our government in relation to climate change, water quality and sustainable fishing. That is because we have invested in a record $1.2 billion in the
Minister.
reef.
The time has expired. Senator Whish-Wilson, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. The UNESCO draft decision not only states that the reef remains under serious threat, but that urgent and sustained action was needed to improve the long-term resilience of the reef. Minister, you've acknowledged the fact of rising emissions caused by the burning of fossil fuels has on coral health. How is the Albanese Labor government's approval of new coal and gas projects, including 3 coal mines in 53 days, taking urgent and sustained action to protect the reef?
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson. Minister.
Well, the UNESCO draft decision cites significant progress being made by the Albanese Labor government, particularly in relation to our policy on climate change, as well as measures in relation to water quality and sustainable fishing. And this is all about putting the reef on a stronger and more sustainable path. I'd note that there was a public reporting of a source close to UNESCO describing how our government's the Australian government's approach had changed completely, and the difference in the new government and the old one is like night and day. But of course, we understand that these
Minister,
decisions.
please resume your seat. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Point of order on relevance, President. I did ask specifically how was the approval of 3 coal mines in 53 days taking urgent and sustained action on climate change.
Yes, you did, Senator Whish-Wilson, and you also talked about the UNESCO draft recommendations, so the minister is being relevant. Minister Wong, please continue.
What I was going to say, of course, this decision does not mean the reef is unclear, and I'd make this point. If we collectively, humanity, doesn't deliver on the goals of the Paris Agreement, every coral reef in the world is vulnerable. Every coral reef in the world is vulnerable. So what we are doing is working with industry to transform this.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Sheldon.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Government Services, Senator Farrell. During the winter recess, Commissioner Holmes handed down the Royal Commission into Robodebt's final report, which highlighted that for 4.5 years the former Liberal national governments pursued its unlawful Robodebt scheme. Given it was a time when some of the most vulnerable Australians must have felt their government, with the Liberals and Nationals at the reins, had abandoned them. Can the Minister update the Senate about what the report found on the design, implementation and operation of the former Liberal government's cruel scheme?
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Sheldon for his question and his deep concern for the impact of Robodebt on so many Australians. And yes, I can answer that question because Labor committed to establishing a Royal Commission into Robodebt, and just over 12 months after being elected, on the morning of the 7th of July 2023, Commissioner Holmes delivered her final report for all to see. The report set out in its findings on the Liberal and Nationals' cruel Robodebt scheme. The report highlighted how the schemes unlawfully raised $1.8 billion of debt against approximately 435,000 vulnerable Australians. The report told the personal stories of tragedy and suffering this terrible scheme caused members of our community who, through no fault of their own, felt attacked with nowhere to turn. In the final report, Commissioner Holmes noted that the Robodebt scheme was put together on an ill-conceived, embryonic idea and rushed to Cabinet. It's clear enough why it was thought necessary and desirable, because of the dual advantages of supposed savings and its neat alignment with the political rhetoric of the day about the social security system and the need for integrity in welfare payments. Yet, despite the damning findings of the report, which found that the Liberal and Nationals had put political point scoring over the welfare of vulnerable Australians. Sadly, many of the scheme's architects remain members of the coalition benches to this day.
Thank you, Senator Farrell. Senator Sheldon, first supplementary.
Is it correct that the Royal Commission's final report reiterated the unlawfulness of the scheme, including through evidence of how the former Liberal and National government was warned repeatedly about this and yet still hounded some of the most vulnerable in our community for unlawful debts? Has there been any evidence that those impacted by the Royal Commission have accepted any responsibility for their actions? And what, if anything, has been the reaction to the findings of the report?
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Sheldon again for his first supplementary question. And unfortunately, the answer to that question is no, Senator Sheldon, because the Royal Commission's final report was clear. The former Liberal government ignored warnings of the scheme's unlawfulness. With everything that has been exposed, I would have expected that those responsible would have apologised to all of those Australians who paid the price of their actions. But yesterday, former Prime Minister Mr Morrison and the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Dutton, doubled down. Mr Morrison stood in the other place and, instead of apologising, made out that he was somehow a victim of the Robodebt scheme. But what was more shocking was that Senator Watt. What was more shocking was that Mr Dutton stood by Mr Morrison on the last night's 7:30 report. It really says something about the state of the modern Liberal Party.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Sheldon, second supplementary.
Well, given many of the people who are unlawfully targeted by the scheme have followed the Royal Commission very closely and may be watching the Senate today, can the minister update the Senate on any final observations in the Royal Commission into Robodebt's final report?
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. And Senator Sheldon, yes, I can, because the government established the Robodebt Royal Commission to provide Australians with answers about how the scheme was established and operated. And we are confident that Commissioner Holmes has provided these answers. In summing up of the final report, Commissioner Holmes noted, "I am confident that the Commission has served the purpose of bringing into the open an extraordinary saga, illustrating the myriad of ways that things can go wrong through venality, incompetence and cowardice." Trifecta. The government is currently working through the recommendations in the report, as we on this side are committed to ensuring that this shameful program could never ever happen again in this country.
Thank you, Minister. Senator David Pocock.
Thank you, President. My question is for the Minister representing the Attorney-General, Minister Watt. The Lobbyist Code of Conduct prohibits former government advisers actively lobbying for 12 months in a relevant area. Minister, in the government's view, does it pass the Lobbyist Code of Conduct, or even just the pub test, that following the election, an advisor for the former government with responsibility for the COVID vaccinations went to work in an external affairs role at a COVID vaccine manufacturer, or a former senior advisor in the communications portfolio opening up their own lobbying firm and engaging with telecommunications clients, or a former senior advisor with responsibility for gambling policy lobbying on behalf of wagering operations?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Pocock, for your question. I don't propose to comment on any individual cases that you've raised, partly because I'm not aware of the specific cases, but obviously I do want to respect individuals' privacy as well. But I'm certainly happy to talk to you in more general terms about the position of our government on lobbyists. As you probably recall, Senator Pocock, the Lobbying Code of Conduct was actually established by the last Labor government to ensure that government representatives who are approached by lobbyists know whose interests they represent. And the Albanese government certainly expects lobbyists and government representatives to comply with the code. Any person who lobbies the Australian government on behalf of a third-party client must be registered on the Register of Lobbyists and must comply with transparency and integrity framework that is set out in the code. The code also prohibits government representatives, including ministers and their staff, being party to lobbying by a lobbyist, acting on behalf of a third-party client who is not on the register. So, as I say, the Albanese government certainly expects lobbyists and government officials to comply with the lobbying code of conduct. The responsibility for enforcing the code sits with the Attorney-General's Department, and they do that in an active way, including investigating alleged or potential breaches. If there are particular cases that you're aware of that you believe should be investigated, then obviously it's open to you to refer them to the Attorney-General's Department. But what I am advised of is that the Attorney-General's Department has concluded 12 investigations since May 2022. In 3 of those cases, the department determined that there had been a breach of the code, and on all 3 of those occasions the nature of the breach was inadvertent and isolated and had been proactively remedied and therefore did not warrant further enforcement action. But the department is continuing to investigate one other matter.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. A cursory glance at LinkedIn shows a number of people who are potentially in breach of this. What proactive measures does the Attorney-General's Department do to actually look for this sort of lobbying that is prohibited under your own code?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Watt.
Well, as I say, Senator Pocock, the Attorney-General's Department is currently investigating a number of matters and potential breaches of the code, and as I said already, has concluded 12 such investigations since the change of government in May last year. But beyond that, under the code, the Secretary of the Attorney-General's Department may bar a lobbyist who has committed a serious breach of the code from being registered for a period of up to 3 months. And what that does, being deregistered, effectively prohibits a lobbyist from lobbying ministers, their staff and officials, as the code prohibits government representatives from being party to lobbying activities by unregistered lobbyists. And a serious breach includes unregistered lobbying and breaching the principles of engagement with government representatives. The Secretary may also remove a registered lobbyist from the register if they fail to comply with their obligations under the code. So I'm personally encouraged that the Attorney-General's Department is actively investigating these potential breaches.
Thank
and
you, Minister.
those
The time
are
for
underway
answering
still.
has expired. Senator Pocock, second supplementary.
President. Minister, how is a 3-month holiday from lobbying acceptable for a serious breach of our lobbying code of conduct? In other countries around the world, there are civil and sometimes even criminal charges because people know how important it is to regulate lobbyists. Yet both major parties seem to have no issue at all. Do something wrong, do the worst you can in the lobbyist code of conduct. 3-month holiday. Put your feet up and we'll see you back here in 90 days.
Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Pocock. I don't think that anyone is suggesting that a 3-month holiday, as you put it, is necessarily the only or a sufficient punishment. As I understand it, and as I've already mentioned, the Secretary may bar a lobbyist for a period of time. But I should also say that the government is considering further changes to the code, and we welcome suggestions for reform on this matter. The code was updated last in February 2022 by the former government, and the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security is currently reviewing the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme, which also regulates lobbying activities. The government looks forward to receiving the committee's report and will consider any recommendations it may make, including in relation to lobbying activities. So if you haven't done so already, Senator Pocock, I'd encourage you to participate in that inquiry.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Little.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator Gallagher. In 2020, the Prime Minister tweeted, "Voice, truth, treaty. That's the future I want for Australia." However, in a recent interview with Ben Fordham on 2GB, he stated emphatically, "This is not about a treaty. This isn't about that." The Prime Minister then described a treaty as something that isn't happening. Can the Minister confirm which version of the Prime Minister's statement is the future that he wants? Yes. Is it a treaty or not a treaty?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Order. Thank you.
Order.
Thank you, President. Well, as everyone in this chamber knows and understands, the 2023 referendum is about constitutional recognition through a voice, and Australians will be asked a simple question: do you support a change to the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice? Let's be clear about what the voice is. The voice will be a committee of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who will give advice to the Parliament and Government on issues that affect their community. It will include Indigenous Australians from every state and territory, the Torres Strait Islands and representatives from the regions and remote areas. So that is the question that will be put to the Australian people later this year. It is about constitutional recognition through a voice to Parliament. And I think it is interesting, again, about those that are opposing this very simple question and generous offering, that they are seeking to conflate a whole range of other matters in their opposition to the voice referendum.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Little, first supplementary.
Thank you. Voice architect Professor Megan Davis has described the voice as being the enabling mechanism for a treaty. Is Professor? We're talking about Professor Megan Davis. Just in case you didn't hear that.
Senator Little, please resume your seat. Order across the chamber. Senator Hughes and Senator Watt. Order. Senator Shoebridge, order. Order across the chamber. Senator Little, I'm going to invite you to begin your question again. I expect Senator Little to ask her question in silence.
Well, who could hear them?
Thank you. Voice architect Professor Megan Davis has described the voice as being the enabling mechanism for a treaty. Is Professor Davis correct that the voice will be used to enable a treaty to occur?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I will refer the senator to the principles that have been released as part of the work that's been done over many years, I should say, formally under
order.
With a consensus and support across both chambers of Parliament until recently, unfortunately. This has been work that has been underway for years. The voice will give an independent advice to the Parliament and Government. The voice will be chosen by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people based on the wishes of local communities. It will be representative of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Little.
Very specific. Will the voice be used to enable a treaty to occur?
Senator Little, the minister is being directly relevant to your question. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, because I am explaining the principles that underpin the voice, which is the question that the senator has asked of me. It will be empowering, community-led, inclusive, respectful and culturally informed, accountable and transparent, work alongside existing organisations and traditional structures, will not have a veto power, and, as the minister has said, will focus on health, education, jobs and housing.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Little, second supplementary.
So the Minister for Indigenous Australians has said the budget funding for a Makarrata Commission is really code for treaty. End of quotes. What other codes is this government using to deceive the Australian population?
Good question.
I'm not going to call the minister until the interjections cease. Minister Gallagher.
It's the last end of that because of the noise.
Senator Little, would you repeat the question, please? Thank you.
So the Minister for Indigenous Australians has said the budget funding for a Makarrata Commission is really code for treaty. What other codes is this government using to deceive the Australian population? Thank you.
Order. Order. Minister Gallagher.
The government has been very clear about what the question that will be put forward to people when the referendum is held. That information is very clear. The question is clear. It has been developed over years, forming of tripartisan and multi-partisan cooperation, frankly, until recently. And we have been very clear about what the question is. We've been clear about what the principles of the voice is, and I completely reject the assertion that is implicit in that question about us not being upfront.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Cash, your interjections are disorderly and they're constant. I'm asking you to cease. Minister, please continue.
Thank you. I reject that assertion completely in the question. We've been very clear, and we look forward to working right across the country, across the community, across faith groups, across civil society, across everywhere, to deliver this very important reform for our country and walk together and unite the country and recognise our First Nations history.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is for the Minister representing the Prime Minister. The recipients of Australian honours and awards are rightly held in high regard by everyday Australians. In 2019, Catherine Campbell, the public servant responsible for Robodebt and a former senior officer in the ADF, was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia for, and I quote, distinguished service to the public administration through senior roles with government departments. An Officer of the Order of Australia is awarded for, and I quote, distinguished service of a high degree to Australia or to humanity at large. Thanks to the Robodebt Royal Commission, we now know that Ms Campbell's department received legal advice in 2014 that the Robodebt scheme, the one she drove for years, was not lawful. Does the government plan to strip Ms Campbell of her Order of Australia?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Wong.
Thank you, Senator Lambie, and I acknowledge and respect the work that you and other senators in this place have done in relation to Robodebt. And I think all of us, well, certainly most of us, have been appalled by what has been made public by the Royal Commission. And I have to say, I think, appalled by the actions that have been described or alleged in relation to certain ministers, and obviously the hope always is that the principle of a professional, high-quality public service is something that we want to see. It's a good thing for the country, and Senator Gallagher, I know, is working with the public service to ensure that the sorts of principles that Australians expect from an apolitical professional public service are not only observed but are strengthened. I don't really propose to discuss individuals in particular, particularly in the circumstance where a Royal Commission report has been presented and a confidential chapter is subject to a direction not to publish that has been made by the Royal Commissioner. The advice I have been provided with is that public commentary may prejudice future inquiry or investigation. So you would understand, you may understand why I probably won't respond in relation to a specific individual, but I think it has been very clear that the government is intending to act on the.
Senator Lambie, first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. In 2012, the Chief of Defence Force, Angus Campbell, was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for, and I quote, distinguished command leadership in action as Commander Joint Task Force 633, end quote. He received this while commanding Australian diggers who are accused of committing war crimes. Diggers he is now throwing under the bus. Does the government plan to strip General Campbell of his Distinguished Service Cross?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Wong.
I'd ask you, President, perhaps to have a look at whether or not that is a supplementary question, but I will answer it anyway because I think possibly there's a through line which is associated with the award of an Australian honour, although I'd note it's different portfolios. Those decisions are not made by ministers. As you know, there's a process around honours and we have been seeking to improve those and certainly ensure that the honours reflect the diversity of contribution across the Australian community. But my recollection is, and I don't have a brief in front of me, but and I'll come back to you, Senator Lambie, if I'm wrong. But my recollection is, that that is not a matter for government, from my recollection, but would be a matter for.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired, and before I call Senator Lambie, I will seek guidance on the primary question and the supplementary question. Senator Lambie, second supplementary.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. You'll see why this is. The Distinguished Service Cross and the Order of Australia, two of Australia's highest honours. These honours should be reserved only for those who have served Australia exceptionally. Is the Minister worried about the integrity of these honours when it appears they are handed out to people oh so willing to throw everyday Australians and diggers under the bus?
Minister Wong.
I think we've moved from honours to defence medals. Is that right, Senator Lambie? The Distinguished Service Cross, I think, is awarded within the defence portfolio. My recollection, again, I will see what I can find in relation to this, that these are matters which may have been raised.
Senator Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Lambie.
I think my point of order is we can discuss that, who has that. I'm very aware of that. But is the Minister worried about the integrity of these honours when it appears they are handed out to people oh so willing to throw everyday Australians and diggers under the bus? There is an integrity problem here.
Senator
I'm asking you if the government is concerned about that.
Senator Lambie, that's not a point of order. The Minister was trying to establish the relationship between the primary, the first and the second supplementary. Minister, please continue.
The government is concerned about what has occurred in relation to Robodebt, and we are concerned, as I know you are, Senator, about the vulnerable Australians who were targeted unfairly, and we are concerned about the tragedies and the human cost of this. And that is why we asked for a Royal Commission, and that is why the government will methodically go through the recommendations of that Royal Commission, including that which has not been published. So you are right to point to that as a sorry, am I done?
Oh, yes, you are, indeed.
I just realised.
Thank you for drawing it to your own attention. Yes, Minister. Thank you. Senator Stewart.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Can the Minister please update the Senate on the Independent Reserve Bank Board's interest rates decision today and outline how the Albanese Labor government is addressing inflation in our economy while providing responsible, targeted cost of living relief?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Stewart for the question. During question time today, the Reserve Bank Board has decided to pause interest rates, keeping the interest rates at the official cash rate at 4.1%. This is welcome news and confirms that our efforts to get on top of the inflation challenge in our economy are starting to work. The government's primary focus is addressing the inflation challenge, and our economic plan includes targeted, responsible cost of living measures that won't make the job of the Reserve Bank harder than it needs to be. This includes energy rebates, cheaper childcare, affordable medicines and reduced bulk billing costs. Our energy price relief plan is delivering up to $500 in energy bill relief to 5 million households on their winter bills and up to $650 to 1 million small businesses. This not only eases the burdens for families and businesses, but also contributes on our fight against inflation. Treasury forecasts indicate that our energy relief package will directly reduce inflation by 0.75 of a percentage point in 2023-24. We're also repairing the budget to alleviate inflationary pressures, including returning 87% of upward revenue revisions to the budget, compared to 40% under our predecessors and 30% under the Howard government, limiting average annual real spending growth to less than 1%, 7 times lower than the Coalition, and making the $40 billion worth of savings and reprioritisations across both budgets compared to 0 new expenditure savings measures in the Coalition's last budget. The Reserve Bank Governor confirmed that our budget is reducing, not adding to inflation, telling estimates, I don't think that the budget is adding to inflation, it's actually reducing inflation.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Stewart, first supplementary.
Sounds like the Albanese Labor government's doing an excellent job. Noting the recent budget laid the foundations for growth by embracing clean energy and invested in value-adding industries, people, skills, technology and small business, can the minister please outline how the Albanese Labor government's budget is helping to build a more robust and resilient Australian economy?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Stewart for the supplementary. Well, as we know, Australia is not immune from the uncertainty that we're seeing in the global economy. We know that the challenges coming at us from around the world are felt most around the kitchen tables of people around this country. But thanks to our responsible economic management, we confront these challenges from a position of strength. More Australians are in work than ever before. The participation rate is around record highs, and the share of women in work is near its record high. 498,000 Australians have found jobs since we came to government, the strongest jobs growth of any new government on record. While we know slowing global growth, high inflation and high interest rates will impact our economy and our labour market over the coming 12 months, Australia is in a better position than nearly any other country to face the challenges ahead.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Can the minister outline how the government's responsible economic management is helping to restore fiscal discipline, strengthen the budget and clean up the mess left behind by the Liberals and Nationals?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Stewart for the supplementary. Thanks to the responsible economic management and the spending restraint that would be absolutely unrecognisable to those opposite, we are on track to post Australia's first surplus in 15 years. Perhaps Senator Hume can get that mug out again. Back in black. We loved it. We loved the little video. We might need that mug. The Treasury and the Department of Finance will finalise their figures and release them in the usual way in the final budget outcome. But I can confirm we now expect our surplus for the last financial year to be slightly north of $20 billion. We've managed to do this at the same time we've delivered billions of dollars of responsible, targeted cost of living relief without adding to inflation, an important focus of our budget. And we will continue to manage the budget responsibly, meet the needs of the Australian community and ensure that we're getting our budget back on track.
Has expired. Senator Hume.
Thank you, President. My question is also for the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. The Treasurer's Measuring What Matters report, released only weeks ago, states that the cost of housing has improved, citing data that is years old. But just last week, Roy Morgan noted that almost 1/3 of Australian mortgage holders are at risk of mortgage stress, the highest rate in 15 years. Does the Treasurer really believe that his Measuring What Matters report is accurate, yes or no?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Hume for the question and the opportunity to talk about the importance of the document that was released by the Treasurer, Measuring What Matters. It is Australia's first national wellbeing framework that is designed to help better track outcomes across the economy and society in a broader way than perhaps the budget allows. It uses 50 indicators to measure how we're faring as we pursue a more healthy, secure, sustainable, cohesive and prosperous Australia. Now, it isn't about abandoning some of those traditional measures like GDP or other traditional economic indicators. It's about seeing if we can do a better job at considering the things that are critical to everyone's well-being, whether that's the state of our health, our community or our environment. In terms of the data that was used, Treasury has identified the best available indicators for the framework using data from ABS, Commonwealth departments and other sources. This process, because it hasn't been done before, this is the first iteration of a framework that I know that there has been broad community support for and stakeholder support in broadening out the way we measure the well-being of our community, and it has revealed some data gaps that we will work to address as we refine and develop the framework going forward.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hume, you're rising on your first.
Madam President, the question on relevance, the question was whether the Treasurer believed the Measuring What Matters report is accurate, yes or no.
And there was a description at Senator Hume. You've raised a point of order. It's not your opportunity to argue with me. You raised the issue about the Measuring What Matters report, which the minister is entitled to talk to as well. I'm assuming the minister has now finished her contribution, and I invite you to ask your first supplementary.
Madam President, under Labor, gas is up 26%, electricity is up 13%, childcare costs are up almost 10%, food and housing are up by more than 7% each. When measuring what matters to Australians, does the government regret leaving out these key indicators of the cost of living out of your report, yes or no?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister Gallagher.
I would say that this report is in addition to the other ways the government reports economic data. And I would say, if I pick up the points that Senator Hume reckons on gas and electricity, where we have taken action, you opposed it. On childcare, I believe you opposed that investment in that as well. On housing, you're blocking the Future Fund. You're actually blocking us taking making investments that will make housing more affordable for 30,000 people that would benefit from that fund. So I'm not going to take a lecture from those opposite about any of those areas where they have voted no to every investment we've tried to make.
Senator Hume, second supplementary.
Madam President, under Labor's continued cost of living crisis, the #1 indicator of Australians' wellness is getting inflation and the cost of living under control, and you said so yourself. So why is the Labor government spending its time writing out-of-date reports rather than making the hard decisions that will actually get this persistent and sticky inflation lower, faster, and making life easier, which is what really matters to millions of Australians?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister Gallagher.
Well, I completely and utterly reject the premise of that question.
Minister.
Placed on notice.